All right, so we have our final talk. It's going to be Stephen Vincent here, and he's going to be giving us an awesome talk over Postman, an intro to Postman. I've used Postman a lot in the past, and it is just a radically powerful dev tool. So even if you have used it, I'm sure Stephen's going to show us some things that you haven't learned before. And if you haven't used it, and you do some web development type stuff, which most of us if you're a developer, there's a good chance you're doing a little bit of that in some shape or form, then you're really going to get to see the power of this tool. This is like, if I had to name like top 5 dev tools out there, this is definitely one of them. So, Stephen, you are up.
Awesome. Before I share my screen of sorts, I'm just going to go into something real quick. This is actually, I wasn't sure if I was going to do this as like a YouTube series or if this was going to be a full-on talk. It's just kind of been sitting on the back burner. It was actually a request. We've had like this huge gathering of new developers in the Techlahoma channel, and they've really spearheaded a lot of projects. And one of the channels that's really popular right now is pair programming, and I would definitely recommend people to go there. People are asking for help, or you may be stuck on something, or it's a collaborative talk or effort. But the several that I joined were issues with communicating with either their client and an API or their API talking to something else. And my first and foremost diagnostic step on anything I do is to try to reduce my work size chunks. And by doing that, I can then kind of organize them and go, this isn't the problem, and this is the problem. And then I take that chunk and I try to make it smaller. So ultimately I find my issue. And so the motivation for this is I have a tool, and that's what this is. This is Postman, and it allows me to be able to utilize a method that I'm going to describe here. It's originally used for speaking with, I think I want to pull up the Postman documentation, but Postman is an API platform for building and using APIs. Postman simplifies each step of the API lifecycle and streamless collaboration so you can create better APIs faster. What that pretty much boils down to is right now, the simplest solution is you have a client and it's going to talk to minimum of one to multiple APIs. And if you have a new call, let's just say alive, right? That's always whenever I'm making an API, that's the first endpoint I always make, and it's just alive. And all you're doing is pinging it, and it returns back true. If it doesn't return back true, it's usually throwing an error because it's either not live or it's broken or whatever that may be. And so instead of having to build a client to do that, Postman is the intermediary, and it could do a lot more. But for this example, it's simply just going to be communicating with an API. So one of those things, going back to my example, if you use it on an everyday basis, if like for me, I may be working on the front end and I'm working only on this client, and then someone else may be working on the server side or service side code, and they create a new endpoint for me and they give me what that endpoint is. Without me having to look in the code, I can just simply get my endpoint, I can plug it inside Postman, and then I can ping it. And if I have it right, then perfect. It'll show me back the result that I'm expecting. If it doesn't, I can fine tune it to where ultimately I have my call inside Postman and I have it working. Sometimes that discovers an issue or a bug, or sometimes there's a misspelling on my end, which is why I can't get it to work on client. But either way, I don't have to have that full life cycle between service and client. Another great use for Postman is to also do testing of APIs. So a lot of testing right now you can do within your API itself, but say you wanted to do more, like you wanted to do load testing and you wanted to hit those endpoints. Maybe you wanted to run a bunch of different things simultaneously, like different endpoints like A, B, and C, and then going back to A and filling it with C's data, who knows what. But that's also a significant use for it. And then the most popular use in production that a lot of people use Postman for is documentation. So you have an API or APIs, and you ultimately want to take that stuff and you want to generate documentation. This tool can do that as well as host it for you. So that way you could even have an API locally and then sell it to someone else or grant them access. And that gets really far into their payment plans, and I'm not going to get into, but those are like kind of like the big three that it's used for. So it is available. Before I jump into this, there's a couple things I want to cover. It is available on both PC and Mac. PC it was originally designed for, so all the features are in there. It updates that one first. Mac, it is available both for Mac processors and Intel processors. They don't release the features off as often, but they are still there. And there is a web version, but I would not recommend it. The reason why is because it originally started as a Chrome extension and got really, really big. And they decided to make it a standalone application. So the web version is still available. It is still maintained for the most part, but it is a fraction of what either PC or Mac or even Linux those versions are. So use that with caution. If you are noticing that some things aren't there, it's most likely because the web version does not have it. And they've mentioned that they cannot produce the same quality of product because of how big of a footprint it would be inside your browser. So you can definitely still use it for real basic stuff, but it is not a full functioning piece of software on the web version. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and have a few examples, and we're just gonna touch on some stuff. Okay, so since this was designed either as a series or it was going to be a full-on talk, I'm going to touch on some just basic features and some things that you can do, starting from really like mid-level to very advanced, and ultimately to make maybe some niche things that you may not have known. And we're just going to go through them pretty quickly. And I've already set up the examples, so we won't have to waste any time coding anything, with the exception of a couple things. So first and foremost is a really cool trick that they recently came out with. Before, you only had access to one account inside Postman. So if you had yours and it was like Steven at gmail.com, that's it. That's all I could. But then what if you had another company, or if you were collaborating with another group? You would then have to add that to your project, or they would add you to their workspace or their team. I found another way to organize your Postman if you use it as much as I do. I use it personally. I use it with my nonprofit projects that I work on when I'm collaborating with people on Techlahoma, or even my clients. So if you have a Gmail, my company uses G Suite, which is glorified Gmail. You can create an alias. So what I mean by that is on your account, you can sign into multiple accounts. So I have my main one, I have a client, and then I can create a new one on here as well. I created one specifically for this talk. And for a Gmail alias, you can just do your normal email. So mine's Steven@vindevcorp.com. I can do Steven +, which means alias, at Techlahoma. And that will funnel straight to my Gmail account, but it will allow me to create a new account on Postman. And that's not a unique feature. That's any account creation. So maybe that's a cool feature for you. It's the way I sometimes create accounts. So that way I know if someone sells my information, I know who did it because it's an alias. So first off, I like to do that so that way I can actually switch between, and I won't because I have sensitive information on my other accounts. But it allows me to switch between my accounts so that way I can very easily organize my teams, my collections, my APIs, my environments, everything like that through accounts, not just with the different teams that I have that are available over here. Because then my environments I might have 7 productions or 10 whatevers, depending on what workspaces I'm in. So to recap, I would recommend creating a new account for whenever you're doing new projects. If you do not want to do that, you can go to your teams and workspaces, and you can set up different workspaces and different teams as well. And that's another way to organize them. But again, that will all be on one account. So now that we've actually created our accounts, we're going over to just a simple, I have my default workspace, I have my collections, and I've created 2 different ones. As of last year, if you're familiar with GraphQL, I know me and Aaron have both done a talk on that. So if you want to go back, look at them. But Postman now offers full support with GraphQL, and they're releasing more and more features with it. And we'll go over a few examples with that. But of course, they are built for REST. So they have a full suite of REST, and that's what they did. And REST isn't going anywhere. So we're actually going to start with that because that's usually what most people are using. So in my example, I'm actually going to be using the Rick and Morty API. I'm not going to create my own. So it's just a free API that's out there. I find it comical, and yeah, it's just something I decided to pick. So the first thing is whenever you create a new request, so we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So if I were to go to my collection, which is just a folder, and then I go to add a request, it will then pop up with just the user interface version of what you are probably used to writing in either like JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever front-end languages you're used to writing to be able to contact your API. So it's got the basic stuff where you can either do I think getting requests to see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. I don't think I can. So hopefully we can see this. If not, I'll have to increase my DPI on my computer next time. So my first thing is that when you have the left to right on the top, you have the different versions. So you have get, post, put. These are all the different things you're going to be using with it. I'm not getting to the technicalities of calling APIs because then it'll get us too far away. But you can switch it. So you have get or post. You have your URL for where you want to contact it. You have your parameters if you're using query parameterization. You have authorization if you're going to be using different types of auth. They have OAuth, no auth, API keys, OAuth 1, 2, which injects it into your header. If you have other header information you want to put in here. The body, which is what we will be using a significant amount of, but you can see that on here. They have the form version, raw, binary, and then, of course, the new GraphQL, which we'll look at in a second. I'm not going to get into pre-request scripts or settings, but the tests we are going to get into, and this is what I mentioned earlier, you can create tests in here that will call within it. So when you hit the send, it will actually run the test pre or post, depending on what you use your test for. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at one of them that I've already written. So I have one right now. I'm actually going to delete this old one that I just created. So I created this one right here. It's a get request. Well, it should be here. Maybe I didn't save. Let's see if my stuff is here. Huh, I did save. Well, we're going to build this live so that way we can pull up the Rick and Pretty API. And we'll go to the docs. Well, their docs are, oh, there they go. I thought they were down. Here we go. So we are going to do a simple get request to get all the characters. So their API right now is here. So I'm just going to put that URL in here. And then let's just hit send and see what happens. So I hit the send. I have a simple get. I didn't have to put anything in there because it's just by itself. And if you look down after I hit send, it shows a pretty version, which is just the JSON data, and then they format it so that it's more human readable, and everything's in here. And so it was every information about this particular API call. I can go to the raw version if we want to see that. But for the most part, like that's it. Like I didn't have to do anything very specific. I just had a simple get request. It doesn't require any parameters or anything to be able to get that information. And then it displays it and it shows whatever. Again, this is not my API. It's just whatever it's supposed to shoot back. But then I look at a different request. And so they have one for filtering a character. So if I wanted to get a specific character, and this is your request where it's like, maybe if you're looking for a car and they want you to give you a specific model, or if you are looking up a product and you have to give a product ID. If you'll notice in the URL, we have the character, but then there's the parameterization right here for query params, which is the classic question mark, name equals Rick and status equals alive. This is what you're used to calling. Well, in their form, all it's really doing is if I were to add another one on here, so it's name and status, if I were to do another filter, so I'm going to go to their API and see what their filters are. They have a filter on here for species. So if we add one, so notice up here I have two, and I'm adding one on here. So I do species, and then I want to add human. Right? Notice how it puts it up here. So now it's appending them on there because those are the query params. So you can also uncheck it and it removes it as well. So we're going to go with the unchecked for right now. So I have one, and I only want all the Ricks, the characters starting with Rick, and I want to make sure they're all alive. So we'll go ahead and hit send. And this filters all my information. So it says that there's 29 Ricks. Now there's probably going to be several different versions. It doesn't matter what it is. If you like the show, you'll probably know there's different Ricks, different versions of them. But that's the way I was able to filter it. Now, if I put the species back on, check that, and I say human, I don't even know if it'll change, but 29 count, hit it again, 22. So it did filter that stuff out. So this is one of those easy things that you can be able to do to be able to test an API. Again, it doesn't require you to have any access to a client. You just put everything inside here and you're good to go. One of the things I do want to highlight is right now, notice how I typed in everything for this just directly inside this. Well, it'd be really annoying if you were using a more time consuming, really, if you were using the exact same environment, same API over and over and over, and you're having to copy and paste that. Well, what if you had to change that? All right. If you they changed their API and now it used to be slash, like for example, if you use Twitch's API, they have different versions. So it goes slash API slash whatever the version name is. Well, if you updated that, you'd have to go into every single call. Or what if this information that was on here was dynamic and you didn't want to actually have to type that every single time? Makes sense that you would have an environment, right? Like you're used to having a production environment, a developer environment, even a staging environment. Well, inside here, you can set up environments as well. So we're going to set one up really quick to kind of save ourselves some time. So for instance, we're going to go up here. It says no environment selected. We're going to click. This is the way I do it. I click the little eyeball, which shows you your current environment, which nothing's active. I'm going to add a new one. We're just going to call this one Rick Morty. We're going to have this. We're going to have a variable. We're just going to call it URL. We're going to have a initial value, and I'm going to do the character API, but instead of character, we're just going to do just the API itself, just for the URL. So the difference between initial value and current value, we'll get in here in a second, but you'll notice I put it in the initial value and it copied it over to the current value. So now I have everything done. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. I'm going to go back to my filter character. Notice no environment's been selected. I'm going to go up here, select Rick and Morty, Rick Morty. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click this, and notice I have one on here. It's called URL as my variable. So I'm going to take off this piece right here, and I'm going to go URL, if I can spell. And I added an extra one. Hit save, and then I'm going to hit enter. Same information. What that's doing is if I were to have another one on here, so instead of Rick and Morty, what if I were to have Rick and Morty production, Rick and Morty local, and all of them had URL, but they were pointed to something different. I can actually change my environment, but all my calls are now updating depending on whatever environment I have selected. And this is a really powerful tool if you do have multiple environments. And it's even more powerful if your environment is going to change. One of the other things we'll see here in a second is for using the different variables. But for right now, this kind of gets the point across. So now I could actually go back to my all characters, and I could switch this again right here. All that, and now I'm getting the same information. So now whenever I change my environment, it's changing on both of those. So utilizing your environment and utilizing the variables combined is a very powerful tool. It also keeps things a lot cleaner, and then also stops you from maybe fat fingering or mistyping certain things within your URL. So we've been able to call a simple GET request. We've filtered. We've done something. But another really powerful tools that I want to highlight real quick is utilizing two features. One, I mentioned a second ago, which is using variables inside either your queries, your query params, or your form, or even your raw data, your body. And then the second thing is utilizing tests to update your environment. So I had mentioned using tests to test your code, but you could also use them within this application to do some automated things. So I'll make an example. So I'll show you an example real quick. So currently right now, I have a service running that I created myself. It's real simple. And right now I have a URL, and it's a user, and all it is doing right now is it's just pinging the service to say, who am I? Who am I in this request? So let's see what happens whenever I send it. So right now it says I'm unauthorized because I haven't passed it anything, right? So this is a very common practice whenever you're logging into something. You're sending a ping request to say either who am I, or you send them a token or some sort of auth or something, or even a user ID. And when you pass it to them, the service responds back with either you're authorized, or maybe it'll send back your information, whatever that may be. But for right now, the who am I request is saying I'm not sending anything. So the first thing you're probably going to want to do, and this is a simple handshake methodology that you can look up later is I'm just going to simply log in. So again, my URL is up here. I should put that in. Now I have a newly created environment. I could create a new one for my service. But for time's sake, we're not going to do that. So I have my URL. I have a user login. This is just my simple get. And I put my email address and my password in there. So what am I expecting from this? So I'm expecting whenever I hit send that, first off, this authentication is correct. And it's going to send that information. It's going to authenticate it on the server side and then return back something to me, right? So what is it going to return back? Well, let's find out. So let's hit send. So it looks like it's returning back a bunch of information. So we have the ID, the username, the last name, email, password. I mean, all this stuff is just real simple stuff. I would highly recommend never passing back sensitive information. But in this example, I wanted to show what it could return. So what am I going to do with this information? Well, since I'm the one that set up this service, I'll tell you what. It is very common practice to be able to take a piece of information and use it somewhere else. Well, with this login authentication, I'm going to be, when you log in, the main thing that you want right now is this token. Now, this is a JSON Web Token, or also known as a JWT. Don't really need to know what that is for this example. But what I do need to know is my other requests need this token. So all my requests need this token. That's how I know that I'm authenticated. That's how the service knows I am me. And I pass that inside every single request. Well, it would be really annoying to be able to have to put this every single new request I do. So what might be common, right? Like I might want to take this and then store it. I had a request for something similar to this, that this individual was working on an API and they were sending this information to a third-party API, and the third-party API always wanted their user ID. But they were putting that inside their params or inside their header, depending on the API, every single time. Well, why not just store it? So you log in, or if you had it from scratch, you log in and then you put it inside an environment variable. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to create a new environment real quick. Environment, add, we'll call it Oklahoma. We're going to do one, and we're going to call this one token. Yeah, token. Why not token? And then let's do no initial value. We're just going to go ahead and save that right now. Okay. So what my goal is I want to be able to save this token to that variable that I just set so I can use it in other places, right? Well, that's where we can actually use the tests. So I'm going to go over here. What this is saying right now is that after I run, it's going to take my data, which I know is JSON, and I know I'm parsing it. It's going to take that and it's going to set it to a variable. A JWT in my previous example. So right now what that's saying is it's looking for, inside this JSON data, my return data, it's looking for a value called token, and it's going to set whatever that is to the environment variable token, right? So notice how right now, got to switch to Oklahoma. Go up here, token doesn't have anything, it's 0. So let's go ahead and run this again. And notice this should set this token, so this EY number or UI tokenized value, and then we'll go to view, and now notice, look, it's here in my current value. I mentioned earlier, what's the difference between initial value and current value? Well, the initial value, think about it like this. Current value is what is on your screen, right? On your instance in your workspace. Initial value is what it starts off as, but that's really public. So really you could think about this as initial value is public and current value is private. Why is that important? Well, I don't want to store my private information, specifically a token, on a public call. If I was working with a team, everyone would need to log in, and so the initial value would be empty, but the current value should be filled in what theirs is. So let's say me and Aaron are working on this same project. He logs in with his information, and I log in with mine, and we both run this, and it sets it to our current value. So now all the calls stay the same, but they're using his value on token, and I'm using my value on token because both of them are reading from the current value, not from the initial value. Now, why would you want to use the initial value? Well, let's say, for instance, your initial value is set to an environment that both of you are going to need to access. Maybe it was a product, a specific product. Maybe it was an ID for something. Something that you know is not going to change, or that you are okay with having public information. So that way both of us make the same call, and we're both pulling from the initial value, not from the current value. So that is where it is important to disassociate yourself from other people's stuff. You use the current value. So again, I put the URL version in the initial value because I want that public. I want everyone to be able to use it and not have to put it in every single time. So we logged in, we got a token, we now created an environment and a variable, and then set that inside. Now we go back to our first call that I know needs a token. Right now it's empty. Now, if I go to authorization, I can tell you this is OAuth 2, and then I can tell you that I know what the token is. So I could take this token and I could paste it right here, right? And we know from our previous characters example that I could just use curly braces, and look, tokens right there. It's already filling it out for me. And then I were to hit save, and then let's go ahead and hit send and see what happens. Well, it still says unauthorized. Well, that's not what I wanted to say. That usually means that either my service is broken or my auth is not right. I think my token's probably short-lived. Let me go ahead and hit send again. It'll re-update my token, and then I'll send it and see what happens. There we go. It was just a short-lived token. I think I had it only like a couple minutes. So it took this information and it's returning it back now. So what else can I use that for, right? Like, what else are there some things that I might want? Well, maybe you have a specific product and you have one that does a search, a filter, and you may want to go search for it. And then using this methodology of using a test to dynamically update your initial values inside your environment, the currently selected environment, that will allow you to be able to run one query and share it with other ones without having to copy and paste data. And that's a really powerful way of utilizing this tool in a way to save yourself some time. Now, you're more than welcome to copy and paste this value or other values and other things, but utilizing your environment can help you save time. And then also, you may want to use other things. So if you're on, for example, this happens to me a lot. I'm on a team and they already have calls, and I want to use those calls, but I don't want to have to copy and paste my values inside them. I could simply create my own call that hydrates those initial values by utilizing this method. So I could make a call, and then when the request returns, it's going to fill all that information once for me, versus me having to go into each one of those variables and paste the information that I want. And this is only a single variable example, but if you work on a team, it may be multiples. Or if your API that you're trying to hit, it has a significant amount of other things that you may need to enter. So I'm going to look at one last thing before we call it good for this very intro level of stuff, is the GraphQL example. So again, using it the same API that we saw earlier. So for Rick and Morty, it's the difference between, if you are going to be using GraphQL, is you'll notice that GraphQL, first off, you need to be familiar with the GraphQL syntax, but all GraphQL is that you are sending a JSON request to them, and then it says, I know what to do with this request based off of its syntax. Well, normally you would, in a REST, you would have your URL, and then you have any parameters or any body that you want to send across. Well, all GraphQL is just a body. Even more specifically, it's a body that is formatted a specific way. So they have a new one on here. So instead of having none, form data, raw, binary, you can even now select GraphQL. And this is the syntax. Again, I looked at the Rick and Morty API's documentation, and they show both now for REST and for GraphQL. So this is the exact same call. Now, granted, if you have to be more familiar with GraphQL, I'm only pulling 3 variables. But the cool thing about this now I wanted to highlight is they have 2 new features. First off, it does offer full support for GraphQL. So if I hit send, boom, I'm going to hit that API. It's going to get the information that I want in the syntax that is native to the GraphQL, meaning both calling it and receiving it back. But the second thing that's new is that if you have a specific schema, it automatically fetches that now. I could actually upload one if I wanted to either hit no schema, or if I wanted to upload it. And all a schema is that it's telling you what are the endpoints and then what are their return values. So it said it automatically fetched it. And if you'll notice, I only have 3 things here. So if I hit enter and then I do control space, it now shows all of the different values that I can read from. Specifically, let's go ahead and pick location, origin. Let's do that. Oh, that's a poor example because origin is an advanced object, so I know gender is a single one. So so now I can view that. So this is a really powerful tool that they've recently added with GraphQL, because it now allows you, it fetches that on one call as long as your API allows it. So that way, if you want to be able to see what's on there, you don't have to go to the code and go, okay, well, what are my values I can return? What is this object? Whereas with a REST call, whenever you do that, specifically with your characters, it just gives you back all the raw data. So you don't have to have that same sort of call. So having a schema isn't really relevant because you're just going to pull everything, but your client may only use certain things. But with GraphQL, you are using a subset of that. You tell exactly what you want and it only returns that. So to be able to have a schema already available is pretty cool. So that way you don't actually have to go look at the documentation or the code, or even ask the person that made it. You could just, hopefully, the schema is up to date and you just hit control space and then fill out what you want. So these are just some basic overviews of Postman. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before earlier. There is a Mac equivalent. If you aren't wanting to use Postman, it's called Insomnia. It's a great tool. It's very similar to Postman. It's more leaner, so it doesn't have the GraphQL and maybe even some of the other features that I discussed. But it definitely is another tool for all of our Mac users that are wanting to use that and not have to install this. But if people are having more interest in this, they want to show, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't get to, like generating documentation, sharing certain things with your team members, not just your variables, but maybe your other calls. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with Postman. I highly recommend more people, at minimum, just using it to ping your APIs that you're either working on or you're working with. And maybe that'll cut down on some of the context switching between your client and your API. But that's all I got for you guys today.